Good afternoon. My name is Carolyn Long, and it's a real privilege and an honor to be here in this marvelous day when so much stimulating and passionate discussion has taken place. I know you've been inspired and stimulated by what you've heard so far from such wonderful leaders who are not only intelligent and very strategic, but also very courageous, to have chosen a life of struggle, essentially, a life of constant strategizing, maneuvering, being careful, etc., to advance the cause of women's rights. So it's really a very humbling experience to be among the people in this room. And I know for the young women here, I hope you're enjoying this as much as us older folks are too. So far, you've heard a lot. You've heard about where values come from this morning. You've heard about how we deal with the globalized world, with how to turn the women's movement over to the young, how to intersect the religious and cultural interface in countries in order to move women's rights forward, how to legislate. And now we're going to become very pragmatic in talking about how to create and build movements to advance women's rights. Peaceful movements, but powerful movements in countries around the world. And our job today is about solutions. So I'm hoping that the presentations that we'll hear this afternoon will give you a lot of ideas about strategies and ways of operating that will result in solutions. And the examples we have today have definitely resulted in achievements of a very splendid kind. This afternoon, we're going to look at three fascinating cases of movement building. The first is the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, which began the transformation in race relations in our country and so much more, and has been looked to around the world for lessons and inspiration in so many different situations. We're also going to look at the struggle for justice and rights in modern-day Iran and how women are managing there to go forward in such a restrictive environment. And the third that we'll hear about, and we'll actually hear about that first through a video, is current challenges in the Republic of South Africa that follow on the breathtaking accomplishment of a peaceful end to the apartheid era. 14 years ago. It seems like it was yesterday sometimes, but it's already been 14 years. Some of you were little children then, and I thought it would never happen in my lifetime. I spent 20 years in the anti-apartheid movement in support functions in this country, and sometimes I thought if apartheid ends in my lifetime, I'll die happy, and now it's been 14 years. So we're going to begin with the video with Pregs Govender from South Africa, and she sends her regrets for not being able to be here today because of illness. And let me just say a little bit about Pregs. She worked in the anti-apartheid movement, in the trade union movement, and she also created courses for workers in how to be change agents. And after the apartheid era ended, she was elected to Parliament and became the deputy chairperson of the South African Human Rights Commission, and created a women's budget. I wish she were here to tell us a bit about that. And she also chaired the Parliament's Joint Monitoring Committee on the Status of Women. So she's had an illustrious career in activism, and you will get a sense of her passion and commitment in the video.
Thank you for inviting me to contribute something from my country, South Africa. I'd like to read a little extract from something that I wrote. And it's about my country. South Africa is home to one of the oldest mountains in the world, older than the Himalayas in India or the Rockies in America. About 800 million years ago, it began with the softest of stone, sandstone under the sea. Later, the force that drives volcanic formations, and then the force that shifted the continents apart, molded it further. Water, ice, wind, and fire sculpted it into Table Mountain, or Hui Waho, the mountain in the sea, as the first people of our country called it. Today it continues to change in ways often invisible to the naked eye. Hui Waho has stood through the cruelest of times, the colonial wars of conquest, the genocide of the indigenous Khoisan people, the introduction of slaves brought from Indonesia and other parts of Africa, and finally, apartheid, both its horrors disclosed at the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and its daily banal brutalities. It is easy, even for those of us who oppose the greed, hate, and fear that drive genocide, slavery, apartheid, and other wars against humanity, to shift into the very paradigm we oppose, because it is deeply, deeply embedded in our own hearts, sometimes even beyond our conscious reckoning. We can too easily forget the power, beauty, and joy of our inheritance, the teachings of the Khoisan, who celebrated humanity's deep connection to the earth, sun, moon, stars, and all life forms. We forget, as we cheapen and commercialize it, the African gift of Ubuntu, I am because we are, which encapsulates the dignity and interdependence of every single one of us. We have long forgotten that it was South Africans like William Mutlia who went to prison as a passive resistor and died at the age of 15 years, before reaching womanhood, who helped shape Gandhi's philosophy of Satyagraha as, quote, the force born out of truth, love, and non-violence, unquote. We deify Mandela, forgetting that he could mirror humanity beyond the limitations of learned masculinity because of 27 years of daily transformative practice in prison, in which he reclaimed his own heart in silence and solitude. We have forgotten that in fighting apartheid, we were all, women and men, driven by a vision of a society in which the dignity, worth, and value of every human being would be upheld. There are many, many, many challenges reshaping our world from the patriarchal forces of greed and hate and fear may seem impossible. Using the power of love and courage to be insubordinate to the dominant paradigm in the world and in ourselves may seem like a foolish dream until we remember how Hurikwako was shaped from the softest of stone. So how do we take this power that moves sand into mountains? How do we take this power into dealing with the challenge that 14 years after we have formally ended apartheid, inequality, poverty, violence, HIV, and so much more continues to plague our country? Why is it after having one of the best constitutions in the world, in which dignity is not just the founding value, but is a substantive right, in which there is a clear commitment to substantive gender equality, socioeconomic rights, bodily integrity in our Constitution, that in our laws, such as the Domestic Violence Act, to the labor laws, there is a recognition of their dignity and the right to protect that. that in our country in 1994, we initiated what has become known as gender-responsive budgeting, which has inspired so many countries after 1994. Why is it, after all of that, that today we have such growing inequality and poverty? What is it that still needs to change? One of the facts that we need to engage is that whilst we ended apartheid in 1994, we didn't end the patriarchy in which it was embedded. What we also did was that we joined a global system which perpetuated the same values of hate and greed and fear. Why is it that in my country, 14 years into democracy, we see an upsurge in patriarchal religion and tradition, which pushes women into practices described, for example, such as ukutwala or virginity testing, which reduce women in many ways to objects that can be bought and sold, that are there for the pleasure of men, and are there to be controlled. So what is it that's going to ensure that the power that we have used previously in shifting the apartheid state to one that is democratic, what will it take to build that today? I wish you, all of the women gathered at this meeting, the power of love and courage. We must make the connections in the country you are sitting in the countries from which all of you have come, in my country, and not be afraid to use the power of love and courage to be insubordinate to the power of hate and greed and fear. Thank you so much.
I think you see there in what Pregs says as the next important moment in South Africa's history to consider the next steps in taking on the patriarchy. The patriarchy was there during the apartheid era, it was there in the anti-apartheid movement, and it's still there. So that even though they've had this monumental victory of eliminating legal apartheid, they still have the day-to-day reality of the patriarchy. And it's a pity that she's not here to give us more of her ideas and strategies for where they go now, but that will have to be for the next meeting organized by the Women's Learning Partnership. So you may have questions about the video, but we'll hold them until we finish the other two presentations. So we're going to go now to the example of the U.S. Civil Rights Movement. And while you're hearing these next two presentations, be listening for how the role of religion and culture in these movements played a role, and how did they affect the strategies that were used in these movements. And be thinking also about how do you create a movement that's powerful, that creates change, but that remains peaceful. How do you maintain peaceful strategies in the face of violence and yet become powerful and go forward? I think that's really the central question about building movements for women's rights. So listen for those things as you hear the presentations, and also think about how the building of a movement may nurture and strengthen a healthy civil society in a country. Does a movement be created and get strengthened and achieve something and then die? Or can it be integrated into the fabric of the country so that a civil society becomes robust and is able to take on issues as people go forward? So think about those questions as we continue.